Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for another episode of Eye on Hakko. My name is Kenta, and before we get started on today's episode, I just want to point out American Hakko, we remain open for business. We are part of a supply chain, and we are providing products to some of these essential businesses in the medical industry, military, defense, aerospace industry, and the telecommunications industry. So rest assured, we remain open for business, and while we remain open, we are practicing physical distancing measures and in the office so that we're staying safe. And I sure hope that everyone out there watching is doing the same. Okay, just try to stay safe, everyone. Now, let's get into today's topic. Today's topic is about tip maintenance. We got a whole bunch of viewers today, over 300 viewers today. Thank you all for participating today on this topic of tip maintenance. I want to go over how to take care of your tips, why. It's because to try to maximize the life of your soldering iron tip. Okay, so that's what we need to perform maintenance on your soldering iron tips to try to maximize the life of your soldering iron tip. Now, before we get into the soldering iron tip, I want to go over the basic tip construction of a soldering iron tip. And I think it's important for everyone to know the basic tip construction, so we'll go ahead and put up a slide of what a basic construction of a soldering iron tip looks like. You guys should be seeing a slide of that right now. The basic construction, as you see there, consists of a copper core, iron plating, and a chrome plating on top. Now the copper core acts as, it transfers the heat from the heating element to your solder joint or your application. And there is a layer of iron plating that goes over the copper core, and that iron plating is there to protect the copper core from corrosion. It's also a nice thermal heat conductor. It's relatively cost effective, and it wets very well with solder. And on top of the iron plating is a layer of chrome plating, and that protects the iron plating from corrosion. And the chrome plating is put on the areas besides the working surface area of the soldering iron tip. So that's the basic construction of a soldering iron tip. Now, when we're talking about trying to maximize the life of a soldering iron tip, there's two parts out of the three that become important, and those are the iron plating and the copper core. Now, once the iron plating gets worn out and the copper core gets exposed, you'll get a hole or a cavity in your soldering iron tip. It's like the tooth and your enamel on your tooth. Once the enamel on your tooth wears out, you get a hole in your tooth, you get a cavity. Of that cross section we have of a soldering iron tip, the image on your left is a new soldering iron tip. It's a cross section of a new soldering iron tip, and the image on your right is a cross section of what looks like when you get a cavity when it eats through the iron plating and it gets to the copper core of your soldering iron tip. So I just wanted to throw that out there, make sure everyone understands the basic construction of a soldering iron tip. Okay. Now, when we're talking about, again, trying to maximize the life of a soldering iron tip, there's a lot of variables that come into play. One very important variable is tip maintenance, and there's other ones, for example, like tip temperature, the type of solder that you use, type of flux that you use, operator techniques, and the type of application that you're working on. All those variables come into play when we're talking about how long your soldering iron tip lasts. But out of all those, what's really important is the tip maintenance. So that's what I want to get into in a little bit. I'll just briefly, I won't get into all the details about like solder or flux or operator technique, but I'll just quickly mention that tip temperature also plays a big role. And I need you guys to just remember that the higher the temperature, the more oxidation, the faster the reaction the iron plating has with the solder, and more thermal stress at higher temperatures as well. And at lower temperatures, the slower the rate of oxidation and the slower the reaction between the iron plating and the solder. Less thermal stress on the tips as well. So just remember, higher the temperature, more stress; lower the temperature, less stress. Okay? Now let's get into the good part. The message that I want to relay today is tip maintenance. Tip maintenance is by far the most important contributor in trying to maximize your soldering iron tip life. Now, what am I talking about when I say tip maintenance? There's a few things. Tip maintenance requires regular cleaning of your soldering iron tip, inspection of your soldering iron tip, and most importantly, tinning your soldering iron tip. Always remember to tin your soldering iron tips. Okay, make it a habit to always tin your soldering iron tip. And let's start off by going over the cleaning methods. There are a couple cleaning methods that I will go over with you today, and those are the cleaning sponge and the non-abrasive tip cleaners. Those two methods are what's basically used in the industry. The one on the left is the cleaning sponge. It's a cleaning wet sponge. The one on the right is the non-abrasive tip cleaner. It's our 599B. You can use either method. What I see mostly predominantly used out there in the industry is the 599B type, the non-abrasive tip cleaner. But you can also use the cleaning sponge if you wish. But just make sure when you're using the cleaning sponge that you use distilled water or deionized water. Stay away from tap water, because tap water may have some contaminants on it, and you want to try to minimize the amount of contaminants that get on your soldering iron tip. So I have an example here. This is the cleaning sponge, and this is the 599B, and I left this iron out running for a while at 740F, so it's kind of black. But regular cleaning, like so, will get the oxidation away from the surface of the tip, and you'll get a nice shiny surface back again. And when you do that, you just want to make sure you add some solder to the end before you put it away. I'll get into that in a little bit. But this is the cleaning sponge. Just make sure, again, you use distilled water or deionized water. And this is the tip cleaner, 599B. I personally like to use the 599B better because when in comparison to the wet sponge, there's less temperature drop-off when using the 599B because this is using water, distilled water, so it has some temperature drop-off. The 599B has less temperature drop-off, so I like to use the 599B for that reason. And also when using the non-abrasive tip cleaner like this one, what it does is it'll leave a thin, very thin layer of solder on the surface of your soldering iron tip, and what that does is it acts as like a coating and protects it from the surrounding air. So those are the reasons that I like to use the 599B. And just again, make sure after you clean it, you tin your tip and put it away. Now regular cleaning by using the sponge or the 599B should allow you to keep your soldering iron tips looking nice and fresh, like you see in the picture there. But say, for example, you forget to tin your tips, you leave your soldering irons on running for a few hours overnight. You know what, let's put up an example of that really bad example of that soldering iron tip. Now this is an extreme case. This shouldn't happen. This is what you're trying to avoid. But this is what happens when you don't take care of your tips, and you want to try to avoid that. And in this case, if it gets this bad, the 599B or the wet sponge will probably not do the trick, and you need to find an alternative to trying to refresh the tip. And in those cases, you can try using our FT700 and our FS100 tip polisher, like I have here. And what it is it's a non-aggressive polisher, the FS100, in combination with our FT700, which are two rotating brushes. And how you use it is very simple. You just get your soldering iron tip, dip it into the paste, and run it through those brushes. You see that it's already starting to come back. And depending on the severity of your tip, you just repeat this process anywhere from 3 to 5 times. Tips that are really heavily oxidized, have really stubborn deposits on them, may require more. But this is how you refresh your soldering iron tips. And unless your tips have holes in them, cracks in them, or deformations in them, using any combination of these cleaning methods will allow you to refresh your soldering iron tips. It has some flux in it, but it's not completely flux. Other tip tinners out there have a more aggressive element in there. Ours doesn't have this chemical called diammonium phosphate in it, so it's less aggressive on your tips, but it's not just flux, it's a cleaning polisher is what it is. Okay, and let me circle back to the cleaning methods a little bit. I want to go to those sponges and the brass wires that I previously mentioned a little bit earlier. I see a lot of the 599Bs and the sponges. I see a lot of operators, they're using these cleaning methods to clean off their soldering iron tips, but I see a lot of them, the sponges, they're really dirty, or even the brass wires inside the 599Bs, they have a lot of solder built up in there and it's all worn out. I just want to mention that, these are meant to be replaced. So when your sponges get worn out, replace them, take them out, grab a new one and just replace them. Even for the brass wires that are inside, you just open this up, okay? If it's heavily used, if it's not used that much, you can even rotate it, use the other side if you want. But if they are heavily used and you need a replacement, just empty out the solder that's inside, grab a new one, and just keep it in a nice working condition. That way, that's a way to keep up on your maintenance as well. Same thing I want to show on the, if you can go back to that camera, on the 888D tip holder. So this is the brass wire that's inside. And on the tip, on the iron holder actually, there's a tab on the very back of the iron holder. What you do is you'll just press down on the tab and it'll open up like so. And if these are already worn out, again, if they're not, you can just try to rotate it, fluff them up a little bit and rotate them, empty out the solder. But if they are worn out, grab a new one, put it in, and just make it nice and fresh so that you have a nice clean brass wire as well. Okay, so that was the cleaning methods, and while you're cleaning, just make sure you inspect your tips again. Make sure you're inspecting it for any kind of cracks, holes, or deformations, because if you see any one of those, then you know it's time to replace your soldering iron tip. Okay? Now, this next part, very important, tinning your tips. Like I said before, tinning your tips is the most important thing that you can do in tip maintenance. Always, 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 always remember to tin your tips. Okay, I can't say that enough. Make it a habit, please, to always tin your tips. What do I mean when I say tin your tips? This is what I mean. Tin your tips is simply just grab a length of solder and just feed the tip of your soldering iron with some solder. Give it a nice coating. After cleaning it, feed it some solder before you put it away into the iron holder. Okay? And what that does, what tinning the tip does, what feeding the solder to the iron tip does, is it's giving a nice coating. It's giving a nice layer of protection from the surrounding air and protecting it from the oxidation. And you should be doing this in between your work, after cleaning, before you put it away into your iron holder, but also brand new tips. You should be flooding the tip with some solder. And a good way you can do that is just cut off a length of solder and you can fold it over like a couple times, like so, and then twist it up like that. And then just make sure, brand new tips right out of the package, connect it, turn the station on, and before you start working on your application, just go ahead and flood that tip with some solder. let it sit there for a while, and just repeat that process. And again, what that does is it's giving the soldering iron tip a layer of coating, protection, to protect it from the surrounding air, protect it from oxidation. So that is what tinning your tips is. It's the most important thing you can do to try to prolong the life of your soldering iron tip. It's the most important thing. And again, like I said, make it a habit. Make it a habit to always tin your tips after cleaning, before you put it away in your iron holder, before you turn off your station. Make sure you tin your tips, and make sure before when you're going on break, before you go on break, make sure if you're not using your soldering station, just turn it off. Don't let it just sit there and cook the soldering iron, because that's just going to shorten up your tip life as well. Okay, so that's the basic tip maintenance procedures. Regular cleaning, regular inspection. If your brass wires are worn out, if your sponges are worn out, make sure you're regularly replacing them. And tin your tips. Always, always, always tin your tips. Just, again, like I said, I can't say it enough. Make it a habit, because doing so will make a huge difference. Trust me on this, it'll make a huge, huge difference. Okay? I guess at this point I'll take some questions if I have any.
Is there an expiration date on the FS100?
What was the question?
Is there an expiration date on the FS100?
Oh, is there an expiration on the FS100 was the question. And yes, there is an expiration on the FS100. I believe its shelf life was about 1 year from the date of manufacture.
Why is tinning so important? Can you give me detail on what exactly is happening?
The question was, why is tinning so important? Can you give me details on what is happening? I'll try my best to make it a little bit more clear to you. But again, tinning your tip, again, I'll go over it again. Tinning your tip is just, flooding your soldering iron tip with solder. And why is it important? It's important because you're creating that protective layer from the surrounding air. If you don't have that protection of solder, it's just the bare iron plating that interacts with the surrounding air at high temperatures. And what happens then is it causes oxidation. You don't want that to happen. So again, fresh out of the package, make sure you flood your tips with some solder, giving it that nice protective layer, protecting it from the surrounding air and protecting it from oxidation. I think I got time for one more question.
What if your tip doesn't have any holes or cracks and you clean the tip? You remove the oxidation via copper wire or wet sponge. When I apply solder to the tip, the solder balls up and doesn't stick.
So I think the question was, what if you clean your tips, try different methods of cleaning your tip, but the solder doesn't wet to the tip, I guess is the question, and it will ball up. First, I'll recommend try a different cleaning method. If the brass wire or the sponge isn't doing the job, try using our FS100 and FT100 combination, because if you get the proper cleaning done, then as you can see from this image, it will wet to the tip. If it's balling up, that just means it's not wetting to the tip, and maybe you just need to repeat that cleaning process a little bit more. These principles of tip maintenance and tip cleaning, they can be applied to not only your soldering iron tips, but your desoldering tools as well. So it can be applied to desoldering tools, but with desoldering tools, they require a little bit more work when it comes to maintenance. And I'll go over that in our next episode. We'll go over how to maintain your desoldering tools. So hopefully we'll see you guys then. That's all I got for today. Thanks for watching. Everyone stay safe. And remember, keep your eye on Hakko. Thank you.